So for everybody that wasn't in here before, again, my name is Virgil Carroll. I'm the principal architect and owner of High Monkey Consulting. We're a consultancy based out of Minneapolis, Minnesota, so in the center of the U.S. In that, my background actually has nothing to do with technology. I'm completely self-taught. I always consider myself a business person that likes to understand technology, but not a technology person that fails completely trying to understand business. And that, my background's actually education and medicine, which I've actually said is a really good thing because medicine helps you think analytically. Education helps you think about the end result of something and build backwards. So that's a lot of the reasons that I've been so good in information architecture and really have kind of focused on that over a lot of years. I've been in business for 15 years, so I've been in business for a lot longer than SharePoint's existed. I started out in the web and e-learning world and did a lot of things there. And then we also started to work into SharePoint. So the agenda here first is I'm going to just take a brief moment. We just completed an independent usability study of SharePoint 2010 and SharePoint 2013, and you guys are going to be the first people that I'm going to kind of talk about some of the results. I actually found them very interesting, and then I'm going to go into my stuff. And then I'm going to talk about how 2013 is different, how we do information architecture differently in that, and then I'm going to talk about the site that we just looked at in the last session and kind of how that would be different in 2013 as well. So I had a conversation with a gentleman that I will not name from a big company that's out in Redmond, Washington. And the person knows that I've always been a very big critic of the SharePoint user interface. And so this person said, you've got to check out 2013, which I already had, and he says, because we finally got it right. And I kind of looked at him and I went, I don't think you probably want to know my opinion. But okay, so I said, instead of me just going out there and bashing it or saying anything bad about it, I thought I'd test it. And so a usability test. Has anybody ever performed a heuristic usability test? So just to tell you what it is, let me back up for a second. For anybody that's interested in more information about this, because I'm going to go through this very briefly, I'm doing a webinar next Wednesday, the 24th at 10 a.m. Central Time, which just happens to be 4 p.m. here, and 5 p.m. over on the continental Europe in that. And I'll be going through this more in depth and talking about stuff. You can register up on our website. You're more than welcome to join us as we kind of go through all these things in depth. So the test, a heuristic usability test, is where we actually have people sit down in front of a computer, and we actually have them perform tasks, and we see how successful were the tasks. The great thing about this one is we had each participant complete 16 tasks. 6 questions represented what we consider a site administrative task. So we use the default Teams template to do this. 3 questions represent what we consider a power user, otherwise somebody that has a little bit of skill in SharePoint would do. And 7 questions represented end user tasks. The 5 testers for both 2010 and 2013. The testers were asked to complete the task no matter what. So that's one thing that we do differently in usability, is that we ask them to be successful. And so if somebody doesn't understand how to do something in your system, they may just stop doing it. But in our scenario, we actually had them go through it and be successful. The testers came from different backgrounds in there, but the most important thing is we used people that had never touched SharePoint before, never even heard of it. And that's very important because the true definition of usability is something that anybody can use. And so we wanted to see what happens when somebody sits in front of this. Obviously understanding that the admin tasks would be more difficult than that, we went through the process. And we had a very wide variety of not only how old the people were, but also how much they actually use a computer and how comfortable they are with technology. So when we looked at it, we looked at some objective things. First is the success. Were they able to complete a task? How hard was it to complete? And that kind of stuff. We looked at how long it took to be on a task, because we know that the average person has very little patience, and so we wanted to see how long it took. We looked at some subjective things. How satisfied were they with the experience? And some of the usability issues and challenges we found. So when we looked at the success by task, otherwise were people able to do it, We declared the winner as nobody, because one group in 2010 had success with some tasks, and one group in 2013 had success with others in that. And so what that means is that's actually the amount of success they had. So the green means out of all the testers, this is the number of people that were successful. The yellow means that they took some time to get this done, to be able to get it done, but they were successful. The red means they failed in that. So you look at this distribution and you can see the interesting part about it here is where the green is here, the red is here, where the green is here, the red's over here. So this is probably one of the best things that I found out about this. When I looked at average time on task, 2013 actually had a little bit. So this is actually the amount of time it took somebody to complete it. Remember I said we made people complete the task without any help. And so what you're looking at here is this distribution of there. So this is seconds. I want to make sure that you know it. So one task on this side took 406 seconds, which is about almost, 8 minutes? And this one took 334. So you can see that there are a lot of different things that go here, but overall 2013 was overall more successful in that people actually got their tasks done faster in that. When we look at satisfaction, so this was the subjective, we use what's called the SUS scale, and we ask people to rate SharePoint around different things. SharePoint 2013 actually got a much higher score in satisfaction. And so that was really interesting because people were happier using 2013 because it's got that new cool interface that we all like. So some major usability issues we found in there. In SharePoint 2010, we found that there were 3 major issues that people had. One was an issue editing text on a page. They couldn't figure out how to go into edit and actually edit text on a page. They had an issue changing the site icon. This was another administrative task we had. We asked them to go and change it to their logo, and they couldn't figure out how to do that. We asked them to change the navigation. They had a lot of issues doing that in there. The interesting fact about this was all issues were site administrative tasks. They had an issue doing something that we would typically train people on before we'd allow them to do it in the first place. On SharePoint 2013, we had 4 major issues found. Issue adding a column to a list. They had a really difficult time adding that. Issue sharing a document. They couldn't figure out how to find that link to share a document. Issue following a document. They couldn't figure out how to create a list or link an alert or be able to actually follow something. Issue modifying a view. The interesting fact here is all issues were with end user or power user tasks. People were very successful with site admin tasks on a team site. You know why? Because every question we asked, the link was on the home page right there in those little fun little boxes in the front. It was change your logo. It was all those kind of stuff. But those are typical tasks. So we had this really interesting thing where we found they're correct. If you're a site administrator, 2013 works better. And that's great because that's obviously who they were focused on. If you're an end user, it didn't work quite so well. And so we look at this and we kind of do some things. Overall, SharePoint 2013 was a more satisfying experience. People liked that new user look and interface. They thought it was more elegant, thought it had more interest to it. SharePoint provided some substantial improvements around the usability around site administrative tasks. We always know site admin has been a very difficult thing. It was very good to see that. SharePoint's new modern look and feel provided a lot more difficulty for people doing end user tasks. People could not figure out how to do this. They could not figure out how to do that. And where SharePoint 2013 really had a better time to task, otherwise it was better than 2010, both of them were for way out of the acceptable range. If I look back here, right there, what do you think the typical patience is in number of seconds for a person to try and complete a task successfully? Yeah, probably more like 3 seconds. But we found the threshold is actually 45 seconds. Typically that people will spend trying to figure something out. 45 seconds to a minute. That is right here. So one of the things that we found is that both SharePoint systems are very difficult to use and people have a lot to do that. But I want to leave you with some other observations that I think is very interesting. One of the things is we're trending to this new modern interface that looks really cool and has it. We should always do it. Where I fault Microsoft for a lot of things, one thing I can never fault them is that they are a software company and they make money by selling software. We should never forget that in our industry because we want them to solve all of our problems, but the reality is they sell software. That's what they do. That's what they're there for. Therefore, they've got to go with the cool interface. But people overall don't understand that cool looking interface and what to do with it. We also forget that people are working at an older age now. This is a major problem in our world today because with the 2 recessions and all the stuff that's happened over the last 10 years, there's a lot of people that don't have their retirement, their pensions, everything that they thought they were going to have, and they are having to stay and work a lot longer. Therefore, the new cool looking interfaces, the new way things are doing it, well, if you're a 20-something, this works really well. But if you're a 50 or 60 or 70-something and still in the workforce, you don't understand how to use this. And that's very important in something we don't consider. We like to do cool, but that doesn't mean we should in there. To ensure a successful deployment, and this is going to be my only slide where I'm going to talk about IA before I talk about it in 2013, you actually have to understand your users. So the one thing I've always questioned, and I work very well with Microsoft, is why don't they ever test the people that I think they should? Because I don't know who they test in that, because it's obviously not the people that do end user tasks, because that's where they seem to always fall down. But you need to understand your users, and you need to change the way you do things to do it. That is one thing I love about the 2013 interface is it's very easy to modify compared to previous versions. You need to change it to match your user patterns. That's the critical part. That's really what information architecture is all about, is understanding how our users think, how they look for information, and putting together an architecture that actually works for them. And then we need to also provide solid training. It's the one thing we still know, and the one thing we fall down the most in the SharePoint world is we don't tend to provide good training. And the reality is that where SharePoint, yes, there are definite parts that should be easy enough to use if a person just sits in front of a computer and looks at it. There is a lot of complexity to a system like SharePoint, and we have to provide the necessary training to get people to understand that complexity. So let's talk about 2013. So in the room today, how many people have an active 2013 deployment? Okay, so there's a few. How many of you are thinking going to 2013 in the next 6 months? In the next 12 months? In the next 10 years? All right. So 2013 is different. It's different in a lot of ways, and in a lot of ways it's the same. But the difference that I think it has are the things I personally, having done information architecture for a really long time, were really looking for. The one thing Microsoft did really well with 2013 is they started to understand truly that people being able to modify and make this thing look differently and work differently compared to your organization was very, very important. So what's new in 2013? When we look at all the different components of what we consider information architecture, the information, how things sit structurally, navigation, and the way we do metadata, and finding, for information it's nothing. Good news, you can still store documents in it. The same way that you did before. You just got to know you got to look for the little plus sign now, not the upload link. Or drag and drop, I'm sorry, but that's only with Office 2013 and that. So, or SP, whatever, and that. Yeah. So information, really nothing's changed there. We still have information, we still need to put it places, people still need to find it. Structurally, truly not much either. We still have web apps and site collections and sites and lists and libraries and field types and all that kind of stuff. So structurally, SharePoint doesn't really do anything differently in that. Navigation and labeling, the way we do this, very, very different in the way we do it. And we're going to talk about some of those differences. So there, finding and managing, the thing that excites me the most, this was a game changer. When I talk to an organization, they ask me why I would have them move into SharePoint 2013. And I say, because you actually want to invest in the success of your users. Because 2013, where we can do things successfully in 2010, this Fast doesn't exist in 2013. Bringing in the new SharePoint search engine. And that, so for anybody that doesn't know, we're being taught not to talk about fast because fast doesn't really exist. It's just SharePoint search. So I'm not going to say fast at least maybe 10 more times. That's all. And that. But it really is a game changer in the way we can do things. And we're going to talk about that as well. So let's talk about structurally some of the things it does. Well, really, there's not much new here, but there are some significant components that actually make a big difference. There are some new templates. Has anybody here that's in 2013 really played around with the community sites and that kind of stuff? I actually like this a lot. When I first heard about it, I was like, oh, yet another thing, Microsoft trying to be a little kitschy to do something. But then I started to realize that a lot of what people want to do is very much kind of around that community model. They want to have a place to go, they want to be able to discuss a topic, and they want to be able to kind of build on top of that. It's what we've tried to do with discussion forums for a number of years and haven't, because the out-of-the-box discussion forums have never been any good. But it's something that kind of takes it a little bit step where we can have topics and conversations and really kind of do that and have the badging that goes along with it. So I think there's a lot of it. About the only other significant one, and this is kind of more on the other side of content management, which is the e-discovery center, where you can manage your discovery processes if you have some type of legal proceeding where you need to put documents on hold and that kind of stuff. The significant was this piece right here. So Microsoft found a new technology. This technology was called HTML. They decided to take everything in SharePoint and actually make it HTML in that. So they found that people actually could work with HTML better than they could with XSL, which has been what you could do up to date. And so this right here is such a huge change. I got to tell you, there's two things. Now, I'm a person that's been working with SharePoint for a long time. So the thing that it's made the biggest difference for me is I can do things a lot faster and a lot easier. And I can actually use tools that I like, not tools that I don't. In that. And so this has been a very significant way, because now, like I said, what is wrong with the default interface, you can change very easily as long as you know how to build a web page. And I got to tell you, the most impressive thing I think I've seen around this is in 2010 we had this concept of what was called a minimal master page. So the minimal master page was the minimum amount of code that SharePoint needed in there to be able to actually render the page. In that included the ribbon and a few other things like that. It was still a ton of stuff. In 2013, I've had a lot of fun just deleting everything and trying to run the SharePoint page. You know what? It works. And that's absolutely amazing, which means I can literally take out almost everything that makes SharePoint SharePoint and actually put a page up on the SharePoint system, which to me is quite amazing, because I can actually get rid of the ribbon if I want. It doesn't have to be there. I can get rid of a lot of the different references, a lot of the JavaScript files, a lot of all that kind of stuff. And that's something that's truly amazing from that side, because now kind of the sky's the limits on what I can do from a design perspective, which really supports our information architecture and how people find stuff in there. The other piece is the design manager. I got to admit, when I first saw this, I was kind of skeptical. I didn't really understand what it was there for. But again, it's like anything. If you don't overthink it, it actually has some great features with that. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. And then the display templates. And I'm going to really go on a rampage about this, because this is absolutely my new favorite thing in SharePoint, using it with the content search web part and all the power that you have behind it and the ease in which you can actually do that. And one of the reasons I love this so much is because a lot of my background is web content management systems, which have been doing this kind of model for a really, really long time. So as soon as I saw this, I knew how to do it day one. And that was really exciting to me. So from the navigation side, there's so much new and different in here. And some of it's really great, and some of it's going to make you have to stop and think and that kind of stuff. But one of my favorites is actually manage navigation and being able to actually take a term set and do navigation. And so I was actually very interested on how to make this work, because I think of it and it's like, well, how often do I have a term set that manages the way I want to structure a site and how that works? And actually up on TechNet, there's actually a very good article that somebody wrote about actually their original thinking about this. I'm not going to go too in detail because it'll get too technical, but they have this whole new concept called pinning of terms in that. And so their whole concept was you had all these term sets from all these different groups that you would have people tag content with. And then when you built your navigation, you'd pin those terms to the navigation term set and put it in the order and structure that you wanted in that, which I've actually tried and is actually really careful. But just like anything, it's by a term set, so you can only have one term set tied to one site. That's very important to understand. So it does still kind of make us follow that site model. So if you want to have a separate navigation in a different area, you're going to have a different SharePoint site for that area. But you also are going to have to do a lot of careful planning. We were just talking about in the last session, the number one thing, the reason the term store never succeeds for an organization is because they tend to overthink it. You know, they tend to think, well, since I can put 30,000 terms in a term set, I should put 30,000 terms in that term set because that's the only way people are going to be able to do tagging well. So you have to use it in kind of an understanding there. So it's a great new feature, and once you have that, you can tie into a lot of different things. I love how much flexibility it gives you, because not only can I tie it to kind of their default pages where I could have content, web parts on there that could be filtered by that term that's in there, but I can also do specific URLs. I can also show how I want that URL to be written, all these different things. They really gave a lot of flexibility with this to make managed navigation a very nice feature. And then we have our faceted navigation. So this was something that came into 2010, and that was the ability to be able to do faceted navigation and have, like when we had a search, we had the refiners on the side. One of the really cool new things in 2013 is we can also make our own. In that, our own faceted navigation that isn't only pulling from a term set, but it could pull from a group, or we could create complex systems in that, and that's very powerful. And then we have the inline navigation editing, which I see as both a really cool feature and a really, really scary thing, because as soon as you start trying to have some type of global understood navigation and you have an edit button down there, you got to realize, if anybody's ever worked with SharePoint, they understand the concept of ghosting of pages. Well, you're ghosting the navigation now for that by letting them edit it in line. It's very nice because sometimes you might have 5 pages in an area and this one page needs this additional link but the rest don't, and you can go in and do that, which is very helpful, but it's also very dangerous that SharePoint still follows that whole concept of if you ghost something, it's broken away. You also have URL rewriting. And so what does this mean? Well, the really cool concept, and one of the things I'm going to show you today, is how we can kind of store information anywhere. And as long as we follow a disciplined practice, we can use the search engine to surface it where we want to go. But the problem is if I have something down on a team site way over here, maybe in another site collection, maybe in another web app, maybe in another farm, wherever it might be, and it had a link to that document, that link could be down to that site, which I don't really want anybody to go to, nor actually know exist. So one of the things that SharePoint gives us the ability to do is do what's called URL rewriting. Otherwise, you can determine when something goes there, how it shows up. So instead of being this site slash that site, that slash that site, it could just be the parent site where you're actually at. Clicking that link, the document shows up like it's on that site, but it actually isn't. And that's really powerful because, again, when you talk about modern CMSs or web CMSs, when I think about it, that's one of the things they've been doing for a long time, is really separating content away from the way you present it and letting it exist anywhere. But when the user looks at it, they think it exists right there, like you put all the structure right in place. So there's a lot of power there. And then we also have the term store has some new things. The custom sort order. I can't tell you how desperately this was needed in a lot of term stores, because we all know that in 2010, one of the biggest downfalls, if you're going to actually use a term set, is everybody thinks about things in much in alphabetical order. That's the easiest way to put things. Well, if I add another term, and that's an A term instead of a Z term, there's no way that I can put it back in the order and stuff without deleting all the terms and starting all over again. So being able to just do a custom sort is a really cool thing. And then you have this custom properties where you can actually store other information about this. Really, from our side, this is not going to be that valuable. This is actually something that's going to be more valuable to the developers of the world. They can store, you can store additional properties, and they'll be able to access that. Because one thing that 2013 did is opened up the term store more to be able to manage and do things from more of a programmatic standpoint. And then again, I was talking about the pinning of terms, where you can take a term, and instead of where you had what was it called in 2010? It was replicate, not replicate, reuse. Reuse. You had reuse in there. Now you're actually pinning something to there, and it's actually inheriting the properties of that term set. So you could have a term set over here where you're having people tag information, and then you actually have a term set that you're using for navigation. And though the item exists in both terms and is tied back to this term set, when you set its navigation properties here, it's like a new item. And so that's really cool in that it understands the relationship, but it's allowing you to kind of do things a little bit different with it. So there's so much power that goes through here, and so much thing just from a navigation and the way we do metadata and everything side. And that's only part one. And then we have the finding. Well, one of the firstest things that we go there is that the finding and managing is that it makes it so much easier to change look and feel. Again, I'll kind of go on and on about this, but it allows us to use HTML throughout. And it has much better mobile support. I know that's probably a laughable thing in SharePoint, but it has much better mobile support in that we can actually support mobile, which is really crazy in that. But one of the things I love about it is that this really allows me to use other tools in that. So how many people love to do page work in SharePoint Designer? There's one in that. So we'll talk afterwards. Yeah. So the reality is Microsoft's good at a lot of things, but the one thing they're not good at is building web page management tools. It's just not their thing. They started with front page, then they moved into SharePoint Designer. They tried, what was that other thing that doesn't really exist? Expressions in that, and all those different things. They've just found this is not an area that they play real well in. So what actually blew me away when I heard this a long time ago, when I started seeing the alpha bits of this, was that they were going to allow Dreamweaver. I mean, Adobe's like enemy number one, and they're going to allow Dreamweaver in here and use it. I love Dreamweaver. We do websites, so we use Dreamweaver all the time, and I absolutely love it. I have a directory on my desktop where I just pull down a page and I work on it, and then I upload it, and I just love it, and everything's great in the world. So being able to do that in HTML, not only is it a very familiar form to a lot more people than what it used to be, because most people, if they've done anything with the web, know something about HTML. And so you just have to learn a few rules. But then we can also use tools that we really like to use, that we can actually see things, that you can actually cut and paste content, and it doesn't add all the Microsoft tags around it, which is really, really crazy in that. For managing information, you know, we do have some more power there too. We have our document sets that now we can actually create folders in, which I think is both an interesting thing and also could be a very bad thing, because it's like, so now we did document sets, so we quit doing folders. This super document set, as we like to call them super folders, that now we can put folders inside of. In there. But I will tell you one thing that I really like about it is it does support OneNote, which is something commonly, you know, that we use internally and that kind of stuff. So that was really nice being able to store that there. And then you have workflows. You have a lot more powerful things you can do with the built-in workflows in SharePoint 2013, which is really, really nice. Though you do have to go through more than a few extra steps to set that up, it's still a really great thing. And then we have search. And this is really where the power came. And anybody that heard when Microsoft bought Fast, I knew what they were going to do. And this was a smart move on their part to look at it, because this is the one piece of SharePoint that has always kind of fallen down, and that is search, good search technology. So they bought a good search technology, they integrated it into 2013, and they made things very much better. One, we get better results. We have, you know, Fast has the concept of what they consider deep refiners, and so deep metadata, and so that it looks much further. It tries to actually not only just map out content, but it actually tries to understand algorithmically how that content really exists and why it exists and all that kind of stuff. So you get much better results. You get much cooler refiners. You have so many different pieces. Hopefully, if anybody's really interested in 2013, you sat in one of the search-based sessions this week, because there's so many different pieces that you go in there. I can only go through a few of them that are really relevant to my stuff, but there's just so much stuff that you can look into there. But there's so much power that you can do it, and you can make it very customized to the way you want it to work versus what we could do it in 2013 or 2010. And that. You have your search results. So one of my favorite things about it, and one of the things, again, it's kind of like If anybody's heard of a company named Apple, they have an iPhone. And that, I'll never forget, when everybody was going crazy about an iPhone. Now, I'll admit I have one now, but it's many generations later. But I remember the thing people were so excited about in the second version of the operating system. Anybody remember what that was? Cut and paste. You could finally cut and paste in the iPhone, something that's been the basis of every computer known to man. You could finally do that. Well, this right here is kind of the same type of thing in that. So one of the most powerful things I think about Google or Bing right now is that if I did a search before, or if there's somebody that's done a search similar, I can start typing and it'll come up and I can find those results. That makes life a lot easier. SharePoint search really fell down on that. It's a technology that's been around for a long time, and they finally added that in there. So you can actually have the query history, not only to be able to have the relevance of what other people have searched, but also what you individually have searched, where it'll store it by username and that kind of stuff. So that's really cool. You have so much you can do with the refiners. You not only very easily, in 2010 we could change the order of the refiners, we could take out refiners and that kind of stuff on a search results page, but now you can do it very simply with some points and clicks and some different things. But also you can build your own values. You can actually build your own search refiners and do different things. And you have these histograms, so the graphical, like the modified date. You can make things like a more modern search engine. But definitely my favorite part is the whole concept around query rules and that kind of stuff. And so what a query rule means is, well, sometimes we just want to pull out different types of information and show it differently to the user. You think of Google or Bing. I think Bing. I don't use Bing, so I'm going to assume that Bing does this. But you think of that from the standpoint of when you do a search on Google and it shows you in this box of a bunch of images, things that come out of Google Images. It shows some videos that came out of videos in this way. It shows things from its shopping center that shows you prices on them and all those different things. All those are subsets of queries that have been done inside Google that do that. Well, the same concept now applies in SharePoint, where we can build these query rules. Sometimes you could have considered them kind of similar to search scopes in SharePoint 2010 and 2007, but much more advanced in that we can do a lot of things. And we can say, not only can we pull out and say, when this type of item gets searched on, I want it grouped together, but then we can also say, I want it to show up this way. And so that's one of the real powerful things. So we can group results and we can tie them and really hit a pattern so that now we can do that. Why is that important in search? Well, one of the biggest things that happens in results of search that make it difficult for people is if you have a bunch of results down here and they all look the same, it's really hard for the eyes to be able to separate through that content and really see it. Being able to show information differently and do different things actually helps break up a page to people's eyes and actually makes it a lot easier to see. If you don't believe me, how many of you have ever read a magazine? Do most of you know how to read? So if you've ever read a magazine and you ever want to look at something that can always give you great things, think of how much information a magazine puts on a page in there. Yet you never go in here and say like, oh my gosh, this is so cluttered. Why? Because they use color, they use patterns, they use styles to break things out. One of my favorite parts, not only be able to segment out things, but also use the query rules and the display templates and all the different pieces you can to show them differently, if nothing more than to break out the page. Plus also you can elevate results. So if somebody's searching on, like the latest company video, you can have all the videos show up in a video specific format that they can play right there. So there's a lot of power that kind of goes around that. Did I not go forward? No, I didn't go forward. So what does that all bring us to? Well, it brings us to this whole new paradigm of what we're looking at, which is really this whole thing about how we surface information. So information architecture, one of the key components is that you have information that needs to be stored and information that needs to be seen. And a lot of times that can be very different. People want to store it one place, but they want to view it in a different way. And so one of the challenges we've always had is when we look at something like a folder store, is that for me to find something, I have to know where you put it, which means I have to have gotten in your brain the day that you put it in there and figure it out. Well, it ends up that I'm not very good at that, so I tend not to be very successful. So we have this whole new concept when 2010 came out about being able to better use content types or content query web parts. But again, we had to keep things very structural. They had to be in the same container. They had to be very much localized, and we could never do it. Well, 2013 gives us this whole new ability that I think was the one thing that's been missing from SharePoint for a long time. And that is the ability to say, I want to just put a piece of information up, and as long as I do what's appropriate with it, people should be able to get it from anywhere. And so 2013 really brought this to bear, not only through the much better search engine that FAST brought into it, but also from this whole concept called cross-site collection publishing. So the one thing that's always been limiting about content query web part is that you can only do that in the context of a single site collection or site. With the cross-site publishing, we now enable this so that we can look at it from anywhere, because we're actually bringing search in a role in it. And so the way that works is that you basically can put content anywhere, and then you add a simple feature in the site collection called cross-site collection publishing. You activate that feature, and now on any list and library in that site collection, you have an additional item in the list or library settings called catalog settings. And all you have to do is turn that on, and it becomes a catalog. And so the catalog, to understand this, Microsoft kind of took the model of an e-commerce system. So you have catalogs, you have summaries of view, you have item views and that. I'm not saying why they did this, but I'm also not saying that they're not wrapping Commerce Server into this completely 100%. And so that might be a lot of the reality behind this. So when you actually go to that catalog setting page, you're going to see a lot of additional features. We're not going to talk about any of them today, where you can create summary pages and item pages and all this kind of stuff. But basically, once you turn that into a catalog, we have this search engine, and it runs, and it looks for anything that's been added as a catalog. And if it does, it adds it to its catalog repository. Once that list or library has been added to the catalog repository, it can be accessed from anywhere that search engine has access to. So it could be a separate site, it could be a separate site collection, a separate web app. It could be in a separate farm. It could be anywhere, as long as that search engine has the ability to crawl that content, and where over here I want to view that content, I can see it, or I can use that search, then it has that connection, because search becomes the foundation of how this all works. And the term store plays a role in that a lot of times the way we're going to filter this content is by using the term store to be able to tag things with the appropriate metadata. So the great thing is I can have one site, 20 sites, 50 sites, whatever like that, and I can access this information from everywhere. Now the one thing that I want to tell you for anybody that tries to implement this is this only actually shows up as a catalog once SharePoint has done what's called an incremental crawl. And if most people set up SharePoint, it's usually done once every 24 hours or something. So just because you turn something on as a catalog doesn't mean you can go and use it in 5 seconds. Unless you happen to have access to the farm and you can run that job and you can do that. But once it becomes a catalog, it actually becomes available for you to be able to consume that content anywhere. And that's a really, really powerful thing. So the other concept that they introduced as part of this is what's called continuous crawl. So continuous crawl is something that's new part of the search and that you can turn on. What that means is that SharePoint is constantly running behind the scenes its search, doing it. And the way that works is you can set the threshold down to as little as 2 minutes, which means if you put something up now, it'll be available 2 minutes later, or within that 2-minute time span. The funny thing is, when I heard this, and the guy was talking about this at the SharePoint conference, he says, we did 2 minutes because we couldn't burden the system anymore, and nobody's ever going to need anything faster than that. My very first client that wanted to go to in 2013 says, we're going to have to figure out a way to get around that. And there. The interesting part about this is, for anybody who wants to know a little bit more of the technical piece, is there was a way to get around this in 2010 where you could actually programmatically push something into the search system. They took it out for that exact reason, because this is a very process-intensive system. But the reality is that if your users think they can't wait 2 minutes, they don't understand the word reality. So you can do this. The default is actually 15 minutes. But with continuous crawl, it basically is constantly looking for changes. So changes in the last whatever span of time is held in the cache, and it looks and says, oh, this has changed. I'm going to add this content. So you have the ability to update things really quickly and use this, which actually makes this a viable opportunity to be able to use it for larger information systems or things, where you're publishing out to a public website. In that, you just have to have at least 2 minutes of forethought to make it work. So this altogether is extremely powerful. And so how do we surface this information? Well, we use the next piece, which is the content search web part. So when the content search web part came out, and I first started hearing about this a while ago, one of the first thoughts that I said is, this sounds really cool, but God help me if they kept the content query interface to this on how you build it. And I've got to say, and there's some people, especially up front here, that have known me for a long time. I never say a ton of nice things about the company that builds this stuff in there, but I'll tell you what, they did a really good job on this. They did a really good job. Has anybody here actually played with the content search web part? That's a really nice interface. You can do a lot of stuff. Not only can you actually set up specifically what content you want, but you set up how you want it displayed. You can set up custom sort orders, custom filters. You can do all this very passable or very usable stuff. And then you can actually see a preview of what's happening with your results at all times. So it's a very, very powerful system. But with the content search web part, fundamentally it works a lot like the content query. So now we're saying we want to find everything for this content type, or maybe the latest release to this document, or whatever it is. We're doing some type of query and we're showing it in there. The difference between the content search from the content query is we're no longer in the context of a single site collection. We're anywhere. Anywhere this information exists can be brought out. And we can build really complex queries based off query rules and metadata. We have so much ability, and the real fundamental of that is it has a very powerful query builder tool that we're able to very powerfully build queries and make really complex things to be able to pull information and surface it. And I've really liked that. And this is also the place in which we talked about earlier. You could create your own custom refiners on the side. In that, you have the ability to do that. So what does that mean to us? Well, the reality is it means that we can kind of look at this whole paradigm where we can say, yeah, put your stuff somewhere. Follow these couple of rules, and we'll surface it the way we want to show it. And so you kind of start taking that responsibility out of the content creator for having to make too many decisions, do things correctly, and you look at this whole new shift. And what I'm showing here, and I just pulled up the Contoso sites, in that is that one of the great things when I talk about good information architecture in that is the ability to separate your content away from your presentation. So what this kind of shows is they're showing the same information but two very different ways, yet it's all coming from the same information source. And that's very, very powerful from that side. So questions at this point? Yes?
Do you know any good end-user focused resources for how to use that content by search web part? Because there's lots of technical ones, but there's nothing you can put in front of a normal user and say, this is how to write a query.
You know, that's actually a funny thing, because I consider myself much more end-user-ish than technical. And when we had to add some custom query language, it was very difficult to find resources. So I'm going to say it simply. This is like any other Microsoft rollout I've ever done. Microsoft has yet to get all their TechNet stuff up there in that, and none of the books have been published in that. And so I think, unfortunately, the book publishing world learned a good lesson last time when they released 7,850 million SharePoint books. And so they're releasing a lot less. And I'm going to say I don't know of any good end-user resources right now except contacting people in the community. But I really do think in the next couple months there's going to be more of that coming out. But I do agree. The query part is it's very usable, but it's very difficult to use in that you got to really understand what you're doing. So yeah, I would like to just see a reference on how you write the language of it. But the same with the other side that I'm going to talk about, the display templates and that kind of stuff. I had to guess on all that and just try a bunch of stuff because there's no resources out there that tells you what all those different components are and all the different pieces inside there. So, but good question. I don't know of anything right now. Do any of the other guys, anybody know of any good end user resources right now?
I do because it's technically cool.
Yes. Yeah. Another question?
Do you think the new search extends the ability to sort of manage the information that's in there from a records management point of view?
I do, but it doesn't take away from the fact that we still have to be very disciplined. Where it's gonna really add that new ability, and I'll tell you, I actually know, and I know I'm, probably somebody from Microsoft's gonna come in here any minute and say, quit talking about fast, but I'm gonna talk about a 2010 fast implementation that I helped out with. You can write really, really complex queries. So if you need to do like a e-hold or something like that, or find all the records doing that, even if you don't have content tagged, if you can build a complex enough query, which fast really gives you the ability to really sophisticated, you can use that fast query language and you can build really complex sets and be able to surface information from all over your farm as long as it exists in that. And so it does give you a lot of power from that side, but it doesn't take away from the reality that we still have to understand what our records are and how to manage that from that side. But when you talk about surfacing information across an entire organization and the possibility that people may not do what you told them to do, it does give you a lot of advanced querying ability in that, though I'm going to be honest, it's going to take a lot of technical know-how to be able to do those more advanced things, but there is that ability to really do some really sophisticated queries to pull out things that have word patterns and all these different things to be able to pull in some kind of result.
Not only that, but I'll go one step further by saying the fact that Microsoft actually they use search now to do web analytics.
Yes.
It's a testament to where that's going.
Yeah. I can tell you that going forward, this is their strategy. Search is going to be the basis of everything in SharePoint going forward for the most part in that. So I think actually probably in the next version you're going to probably even see more. So Microsoft, in 2010 tried to really go down to records management, and they kind of realized that they'd have to make too many changes in SharePoint at that time that they weren't ready to really do all the compliance they needed. So they relied on vendors for it. Well, now they've kind of added the new search. And so I think in the next one, you're going to see them really actually try to go after the documentums and that kind of stuff a lot more on that side.
Can I just say that
Yeah.
SQL is switched off by default in 2013, but you can switch it back on again.
Yes.
So if you still want to use these fast queries, you can still do it.
Yeah. So through the query builder itself, you kind of have, and it's kind of limited FQL, so you have the ability to do it, but then you can switch into advanced mode and kind of build queries. But FQL, what he's talking about, the query language, is a really sophisticated language that you can use in that. So let's talk a little bit about a scenario kind of looking at this and talking about how this can differ. So this is a site that I actually built both in 2010 and 2013. It's called Monkey Madness. It has no relevance to anything. It's just a demo site because I was not going to use Contoso in that. But basically, I want you to kind of look at this. It's a site that was built in 2013. It has some good content management practices. I'm using the content search web part alone. So one of the things that I really love is the ability to be able to use these web parts and tie things to a single page that all relate to something. But the important thing for this versus a 2010 version is this was really fast for me. Because I inherently understand the web and inherently know how to do things in the web world and being able to use search and the query builder and everything, I was able to do this probably 2 to 3 times faster than I ever was able to do it in 2010 to build out this type of system. So when we look at this, everybody probably remembers this. A lot of this stuff is not very different from the 2010 version. So this is what the users see. I actually only have 5 pages in the entire site. It's the home page. It's my Doom document types, crazy clients, freaky functions, the search in there. So it's a very simple. And so the reason I show this is all the users see. So when you build a good information architecture and you're going to actually show things to people, you can really think about how you segment out information from the way you present it. So from this side, the really cool part is this is all people see. And that is this very simple structure where they can go and find information. But behind the scenes, you have a lot of complexity. So we have all the different content types that we use and all the different pieces that we're using in there to be able to kind of do the different components that we're doing. And so for this demo, I got to tell you, and I've really found, I've never been a big PowerShell guy, but I've actually been kind of enjoying it a lot. I actually found a way to build a PowerShell script that could build out thousands and thousands of documents and spreadsheets and PowerPoints and that. And I used all these phrases from all these different books, like popular songs and all these things, and I had it pull it out there. So like my PowerPoint slides actually have content on each of them, but it's just random throwing together content, and it built out all these things. Because the one thing usually when we build a demo, the only thing you don't do is build good content for the demo. So I had this build it using Web 2.0 buzzwords and popular songs and all these different things. But anyway, so I actually, this whole structure is generated by about 20,000 documents that I had randomly created and that kind of stuff. And then you have what the content creators use. So this is really where the big difference is between the 2010 and the 2013. Everything else is fundamentally the same, which is really nice because you can be successful with these type of IAs in 2010. But in 2013, you can really look at it differently. So in 2010, where everything was in this single site collection and just in the sites underneath of it, in 2013, I can look completely different. And now I can start breaking them into their own site collections and doing different things. Well, why would I do that? Well, here's the simple reason. The number one frustration you always get from people in a SharePoint system, especially a SharePoint system that has an internet or intranet or anything like that, is they'll sit there and say, I hate it because I go here to do this, I go here to do that, I go here to do this and that and everything. Everybody has a million places. So what if you could have a team site for your HR department? And on there, you could just note a couple of libraries or lists and say, put stuff here and it'll be showing up on the intranet. In that. Now you're starting to consolidate that workload for those people saying, we'll let you put it where you want it on your team site to be able to do it right here, and then we'll take care of the rest through the system. And that is the true power of this from an information architecture standpoint, is now you can actually start to satisfy more of the people from what I like to call putability, or the people that create the content and actually make it easier. And so I've architected a fair number of these in 2013, where you just add these things and say, well, if you want something to be published up to the intranet, just put it over in this library and add these pieces of metadata, and it's all taken care of. And so now I can actually have it be part of my work process. So it's not like content that exists on your intranet or that's shared with everybody in the organization just poof appears. There's some type of process. So now I can follow my process and have the end result be it stays right there. And if I need to edit it, it stays right there. And I don't have to go and move and do all this crazy stuff and follow all these patterns. I can say, here's where I go to do my work. And that's what I do. So it's extremely powerful. And using the search, I can pull all of this information and do whatever I want with it. And so that's the real power of this. The cool part is if you're in 2010, you're not lost, because 2010 still works fine to be able to do a lot of this stuff. But in 2013, we can think about it completely differently, and we can actually add this component that a lot of times we can't in big information systems, which is to better satisfy the people that create the content and how they create it, yet not change what we do up here. And to give you one other reference, the reason folder structures work is because people know where to put stuff. The reason folder structures fail is because people don't know how to find stuff. In a good information system, we're worrying about finding first, but a lot of times that's at the detriment of people that put stuff there. So this is actually allowing us to finally do what we've wanted to all along, have a system where they put stuff and work on stuff and do all that kind of stuff and show it completely differently somewhere else. And that is powerful, and powerful in a very good way. Now, technically, you could do this in 2010, but it was really, really hard. The thing I love about it most is that you don't need to be me to be able to do this. And that's important, because an organization don't have a lot of Fabians and Virgils and Wesses and the people there that have been doing this full-time for a lot of years, and this is what we do. You have people internally that a lot of times are being homegrown and learn on the fly and that kind of stuff, or you have business users that are trying to do that. That's where this becomes very significant, because it's very powerful to be able to say you can work here and we publish up there. So fundamentally, we still use the same thing. We still use lists, libraries. We still store the information. We're just adding that one piece on there to be able to do this very interestingly. So actually, when I did 2010, I built this system in 2010, and then I migrated all the content over to 2013, and then I got everything working, and then I just pulled everything down into a separate site collection, and then I deleted the other one, and everything stayed working the same, which was excellent. So the other parts I want to talk about is this is really the other part that 2013 really gives us the game changer, is not only can we now separate that thing, the way we present it can be so much more dynamic and so much easier. And one of the efforts they really went to is to make this that people that aren't programmers could actually do this stuff. And so with the master pages, again, it's very, very different than what it was in 2013 or 2010. Has anybody actually opened up the master page or any of the files in 2013 yet and seen it? So the way that whole thing works, and it's actually really cool, and I got to give Microsoft credit because this really is an instantaneous process, is that when you create a new master page or you create a new display template, a new content part or whatever like that, it actually builds two files. It builds the master page file and a HTML file. You actually work with the HTML file, and every time you add it back there, it compiles it back into the master page. So you actually never touch the master page. And when I say it compiles it, it does it instantly. I mean, it's ready to go right there. And so I really like that. It's not something that has to wait for a process or anything, but you're able to do that, and you're able to work in the HTML file. And actually, if you follow it, makes sense. It has a bunch of commented out stuff that actually is stuff that you're not supposed to touch or stuff that you can work with. But it allows you to work with those HTML. And the part, I said this in 2010, in the 2010 session, I said the thing that I thought was the stupidest thing on earth that they could have added was a snippets gallery. Because anybody that's ever worked in development knows snippets galleries never amount to much. It's supposed to be where you take a piece of code. This snippets gallery is actually really cool. So I love it because you can go in there and you can actually do any type of web part, configure it up, put it on a page template, and then it'll be on every page that you have that's using that template. And there you can configure it up very specifically. I was really impressed that I could actually go in there and build a content search web part, put that into my page template, and then every page pulled up that content search web part and tie it to whatever. It's very, very powerful, and it's very easy to use, which I really think is cool. And they have every web part and every component you can put on a page in that snippets gallery. I was actually really impressed in there. You can open in third-party products. Like I said, I use Dreamweaver. That's what I've used for a long time in there, and it works really well. And you have commented out components, things that are there that they use to be able to do their parts, but you can add that stuff in there very easily. There is some limited resources out there that kind of explain some of it, but overall you kind of have to just go through the logic of what it is in that. And then you have the page layout. So this is something that they introduced in 2010 that I thought was significant, but it wasn't very easy to use. In 2013, you're able to do it. So the master page is really supposed to be about the overall look and feel. A page layout is supposed to be about how an individual page looks and feels. So you have that ability to do that. Again, it's all based in HTML, and it's a page in there, and you can do pick and choose, and so that people can switch layouts and that kind of stuff. One of the things I loved about it is in 2010, if you picked another layout that the web part container or something wasn't in, you crash SharePoint, and you got the screen of death right there. In 2013, you can actually switch it, and it'll actually move the parts around for you. So if you had something here, and in the other page layout, that here doesn't exist, it'll actually just put it somewhere else for you, which is really nice. So then you can move it around. So you can move back and forth and do things very easily. But the real power is when we start getting to the display templates. And so this is the other piece of the content search web part that's very important, because you not only say, I want to show this result, but this is how you do it. And this is the way a lot of things are done in major web CMSs. You have this. So this is a container. The interesting thing here is that instead of having like a page or anything like that, it actually creates two files. It creates an HTML file and a JavaScript file. So this is actually all managed in JavaScript, which is really interesting. It makes it a little bit more challenging to be able to debug some of this stuff in SharePoint when you're looking at it. But overall, you can add all that stuff and keep it very localized. So you have what's considered the container, which is the overall look on how that goes. And then you have the second part, which is the item. So how does an individual item look inside there. And so you have the ability to do that. They have some default templates mostly built around videos and that kind of stuff. But overall, it gives you a lot of power because now you can take the same content and show it in 3 different places very differently, but have it coming from the same information. And you're saying, well, show it in this design, but then each individual item show this way. And you can do it very simply. You can do it very complex. You can write JavaScript in there. You can add style sheet settings right in there. You can make everything very, very portable and be able to work into that. Plus, you also have access to the client object model, which also adds a lot of new interesting things to do it. It's a little bit more difficult to do in there, and you've got to actually know what you're doing, and it took me a lot of trial and error. So I'm hoping that there'll be some good resources that come about that. But overall, there's just a ton of power to be able to do there in 2013. So let me just give you a couple of pieces of parting wisdom, and then I want to make sure that Alex has some good time to be able to set up for his session next. So, as I like to say, don't be a fool. So the first and foremost, just because you can do these new things doesn't mean it's a good idea. Make sure that you actually understand what you're getting yourself into and make good decisions around that. Anybody that was in my 2010 session remembers the first thing I said is you want to be smart. That's why we do information architecture, is to be smart. And the first thing we like to do as IT people is something new is cool. We add it into our system thinking we're going to be so awesome. And then we find out that that was a really bad idea. The second thing is don't use content search just because you can and just because it's cool. It is resource intensive. If you're not prepared to do that kind of stuff, just don't start going crazy with it. Because let me tell you, there's a reason that Microsoft's new physical architecture, the way they architect out a farm, is so much bigger, and it's to be able to handle scenarios like this. So be smart about the reason you do it and why you do it. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to come up and ask me. I want to kind of give Alex some time to get set up. But thank you all very much for hitting both of my sessions. I appreciate it.